Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Laura Kaplan, and I serve as the membership co-director for the Society of Winterthur Fellows. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Shoshana Resnikoff, our board member for social media, and Alice Dickinson, one of our events co-coordinators. This evening's presentation continues the virtual programming hosted by the Society, made possible through the support of our members, and I extend my special thanks to all of you for your continued critical support. Your contributions also help fund our annual meeting and events, grants for alumni and current students, and the operational costs of our website and alumni directory. Your membership makes a huge difference, and if you would like to renew, join, or make a donation, you can do so on the Society's website, sowf.org. I'd also like to thank the Winterthur University of Delaware Program in Art Conservation for its generous funding to present a series of webinars geared towards recent alums and current students, kicked off by tonight's program. Future offerings are in the works, so please check our website for more information about these and other upcoming events. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Susan Mathisen of SAM Fundraising Solutions. Susan has had an extensive museum career that started at the Morgan Library while she was still in high school. She has a Master of Arts in Museum Studies and Textile Conservation from the Fashion Institute of Technology. As a textile conservator, she worked at the Smithsonian Institution and the National Gallery of Art. She transitioned to fundraising during her tenure as administrative conservator at the Conservation Center Institute of Fine Arts at NYU. She has also held development positions at the American Museum in Britain and the American Academy in Rome. In 2007, she founded SAM Fundraising Solutions, a consultancy specializing in fundraising for art conservation and historic preservation and assisting European organizations with their American Friends groups. Her clients include historic royal palaces, English heritage, the Royal Foundation, the Merchants House Museum, and Preservation Long Island. She has served on several boards and is currently the vice president of the Historic Districts Council and a member of the Metropolitan Museum's Textile Conservation Lab Visiting Committee. Her talk is titled Fundraising in Uncertain Times. And now I give the screen over to Susan.
I just wanted to start by saying thank you to the organizers and thank you for everything. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone today, and I really do hope you find the information presented helpful. Quick sidebar, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat as I go along. I occasionally glance over and can try to answer questions as I'm doing the presentation. One of the things I was asked to do at the start of the presentation, and I put this up, I will do this throughout, I put up pretty things for you to look at. This is the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland. I was asked to kind of start with a discussion of my own career path. As was mentioned, my background is in conservation. So how did I get from treating tapestries to raising money? Because no career ever has a straight path. My career started when I turned the corner at the Art Institute of Chicago and saw Seurat's Grand Jatte. And I said to myself, this is what I want to do. And a year later, I was, as Lara said, working at the Morgan Library with the intention of becoming a medieval manuscript curator. And in my tenure there, I worked there straight through university and grad school. I realized that the conservators were more hands-on with the art, not to mention the fact they threw better parties. So I changed course. I worked with the Morgan's book conservators as a volunteer. And one day someone noticed I was really good with a needle. And they all thought I should probably be a much better textile conservator. So they arranged for an internship at St. John the Divine, where the Morgan's tapestry was being conserved at the time. And the rest, as they say, is history. So after 7 years of bench work and a year-long stint at a preservation architecture firm, I became the administrative conservator at the conservation program at NYU. And this was a time when the concept of a conservator who solely did administration and wasn't a lab head was very new. At that time, I was often told I wasn't a conservator anymore, to which I would sort of say, well, if I'm not, then why am I at the AIC annual meeting every year? So I kind of twisted that and said I was a non-practicing conservator, which is something I still say to this day. And in this role is where I realized that my strengths were in admin work, not treatment. And that was also a point too, where the field was moving more towards technical analysis. I came from it, from the craft tradition. And, I also realized that, going with your strengths and weaknesses, you have better career satisfaction if you really work to bolster your strengths instead of trying to fix your weaknesses. Now, part of my role at NYU was as the development officer for the department. And so I earned a certificate in fundraising management at the NYU philanthropy program. And when my tenure there ended, it was time to do a career assessment. I knew I didn't want to go back to the bench, and I liked this fundraising stuff. So I began laying the groundwork for what would become my firm. I talked to colleagues about the needs for such services, had development positions for credibility, and in 2007 opened up my shop. 13 years on, what started as a firm dedicated to fundraising for conservation and historic preservation has evolved into an international company. The core function was still there, that fundraising for conservation, but as opportunities arose, I was able to build the company both geographically and in terms of services. So we're really become a nonprofit management firm. We're doing fundraising, we're facilitating strategic plans, we're doing some project management, interim staffing, and helping European organizations with their American Friends schemes and compliances. And the lesson I learned about here is about being nimble. For starters, be willing to take a gamble. Being open to new possibilities means not just evaluating risks, but giving an idea a try, regardless of what is the outcome. Use both your successes and failures as a way to learn. Failures have their advantages. As they highlight what doesn't work, they allow you to concentrate on what does. So you can, rejigger things as you go along. And consider pivoting your services or the markets you serve. This is particularly important during this COVID era. When all the lockdowns and everything happened, I just didn't continue doing what I was doing. I became an expert in all of the aid packages. So in that first month and a half, I was doing PPP applications, EIDL loan, SBA loans, all of that. And then when the CARES Act grants with the NEH, the NELA, and all the other sort of programs came about, I pivoted and started doing all of those for everybody. So what you have to think about is it's not the product of what you do, it's about your expertise. And then how you could take that expertise in changing climates and adapt it so you become what is needed at the time. So hopefully that will help inspire, give you some ideas as you go along your own career paths. Now, let's get on to the topic at hand. And for now, I want to start with a fundraising 101. And I'm not giving a list of funders. There is no list of funders. I am asked this all the time. I'll tell you now, it doesn't exist. Okay, here we go. Sorry, I have to get used to this. So we're going to look instead at the two types of fundraising. And the first being responsive. There's a problem, you've had an emergency, and you're seeking funds in reaction to the problem, to solve the problem. And this is where the COVID relief and the recovery grants and all those various solicitations related to that comes in. It's about solving an unusual problem, a disaster, what have you, really quickly without the pressure of donor cultivation or relationship building. Now, strategic fundraising is in where you create a plan of action to reach your fundraising goals. So you think strategically about who you're approaching, how you're going to ask, and for what. You get more creative about how your case for funding is presented. You don't always do it the same way. And I'll talk a little bit about this later. You plan your solicitation mechanisms. What are the grants you're applying for? What's that calendar? What is your calendar of appeals going to be? How many are you going to do? Are you going to target those appeals, or are you just going to do broad ones to everybody? And what about your cultivation events? How are you going to get the donor engaged in your program, your project, your institution, what have you? And, cultivation strategies, fundraising, development, it's all about building relationships with the donors, not just soliciting them once and disappearing. So, because when you have a solid relationship with the donor, they become a partner and usually will give multiple gifts. So that does become a really integral part of, developing that relationship with that donor so they become essentially part of your family. So where does the money come from? And individuals, corporations, and foundations are the ones I'm going to just address today. I'm not going into government agencies and all of that. And I'm going to start with individuals, mainly focus on those. And yes, now donors are, dealing with their own COVID-related issues. Their stocks took a hit, they lost their job, business is slow. All of that is true. And I can't tell you how many organizations have said, well, we can't ask for money right now. And my response to that was always, don't make the decision for the donor. The current climate may not seem conducive to giving, but let the donor make the decision to give. And if you have cultivated right and you have long-term donors, your organization is deep in their hearts, and they are the ones who will support you during the crisis. Now, they may not give as much this year, which they should, because the tax laws have changed just for 2020, and they actually get a better tax break. But, but they will continue to give. And, and if you continue to keep them in the family, as I call it, the right way, they will continue to come back and give as you still need more money. So why do we go to individuals? 75% of charitable giving is from individuals. And this is because they have no restrictions. They can do whatever they want. How big their gift can be, they can decide. What it can be used for, they can restrict it, not restrict it. It's up to them. Even how they will pay out. Maybe they want to pledge it. Maybe they want to give it to you outright. I had one client at the start of COVID who had a $250,000 grant that was going towards a capital project, because obviously with all this, the capital project was put on hold. So the donor said, fine, keep the $250, use it for whatever you need to for the general operating support during the COVID crisis, and I'll give you another $250 when the capital campaign starts up again. So, like I said, if you've done it, they can do whatever they want. This is very different from foundations, corporations, and government agencies who all have grant caps or rules to maintain their tax status, guidelines that must be followed, and limited resources. So they're much more restricted. Now, why do individuals give? It's a self-serving motivation because they want to be bigger than they want to be involved in something bigger than themselves. But they also believe in your mission and they share your values. They're interested in your programs and they want to make a difference in your organization. They genuinely like you and want to be again, a part of that family. So where do you find them? And we'll start with your constituents because you have a wealth of prospects already in your bailiwick there. These are the people that are using your resources. They're visiting you regularly to see your exhibitions or whatever. They attend your events. They're the teachers, the parents, the students in your school groups, and they're the researchers that might use your library. So your current donors, how do you get them interested in whatever it is you're doing? And that again too goes back to that cultivation, the lab tours, the lab tours, and I will always come back to speaking as a conservator just to forewarn you. Storage tours, the exhibition tours, however you want to do it, one-on-one meetings. But my advice to you here is don't just look at the big donors because that's where everybody wants to go. I always look at the consistent small ones. I am far more interested in that donor that gives me $250 a year than the one who comes to a benefit once, buys a $10,000 table, and I never hear from again. That $250 donor is loyal, she's engaged, and she could possibly give more, but she probably hasn't been asked. And don't assume just because she's only giving $250 a year that she can't give more. There are many little surprises locked up in your donor pool that you don't know about. And this happened to me once. I was working with an alumni organization of a high school. And I worked with, the board was a bunch of good old Brooklyn boys who were like, we want the big bucks. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go look through some of your donors and see if I can look at giving patterns, look at 10-year giving patterns, and see if I can pop up any of the new prospects I hadn't seen before. And sure enough, I saw this one woman. She hadn't given a lot. She was given little bits, dribs and drabs every year, and, you know, slowly increasing each year. So I thought, okay, let me do a Google, see what she's about. Turns out she was worth $1 billion. And nobody knew this, and nobody would even thought to look at that, because she had only given maybe a total of $300 in the, you know, the last 6 years she had been given. So really think that way, and look at those as well, because there could be some surprises. Your lapsed donors, they already have a connection. Give them that little push they need to come back into your fold. The board, and I can hear the groans even though you're all muted. But the reality is that your board has to be engaged in the process. It's the only way you're going to succeed. And keep in mind, and I'll say this again, fundraising is a partnership between the staff and the board, not the responsibility of one or the other. So you need your board to step up to the plate and talk, you know, bring in who they know, bring in their friends, bring in, and I know they're all hesitant to do it and everything, but it has to be made very, very clear. I know it's easier said than done, but anyway. Look at your key volunteers. You know, they view their contribution as an extension of their commitment. And they can also help you find and cultivate new donors. They're great for engaging donors, because a volunteer always has what we refer to as a spark story, and what, you know, inspired them to get involved in the organization. And a lot of time that, you know, spark story can inspire donors as well, and to do the same. And you as staff, you know, you're invaluable in terms of establishing connections with your users. So, you know, you have a collector who's come in asking, you know, information about materials in their collection, or you have someone who's loaned to an exhibition. All of those are donor prospects, and should not be, you know, and should be cultivated and looked into. Now, once you get beyond the inside, look outside and expand the pool, as I like to say, because we do refer to it as a donor pool. Look at people who give to similar organizations. Donors concentrate their giving. They're not going to give to one organization that, you know, does their interests, so a history organization or something like that. If they're interested in Tudor history, they're going to give to more than one organization, or support them, or become a member of them, whatever. You know, it goes down to that mission. So look at your, you know, your you know, what organizations whose missions align with yours, and see who's giving to them, who's on their donor lists, their annual report, their benefits lists. And two, try to, you know, develop a collaboration with them. If their mission's in sync with yours, there's no reason why you can't do some sort of joint event together. And this is actually encouraged by a lot of funding agencies. And what it does is it helps their audience learn about you, and your audience learn about them. And it doesn't result in sort of stealing of donors. It actually results in gains on both sides, because, as I said, people will support, if they're interested, they'll support more than one organization. And this is particularly keen here in New York, where, you know, in the Anglo-American organizations, everybody's a member of everything. And, you know, and we all work together, and we do, you know, lectures and garden parties and everything all together every year. And similarly, look beyond the obvious. I'm sorry, I'm going to hit on a slide. I'm just realizing that. I'm sorry, I am having trouble moving this, I'll leave it. You know, look for those whose interests align with the work you do. So, you know, what are your contents of your collection? And what is the subject matter, and who's going to be interested in funding that subject, and the subject of the materials in the collection. So you're not just looking at who's funding art, who's funding, you know, archives, who's funding whatever, you know, museums in general, or conservation in general. You're looking at who's funding American history, or who's funding decorative arts, and that kind of thing. And I recently signed on with a new prison museum. And, you know, we're not looking at museum funders for this. We're looking at criminal justice funders, and we're looking at, you know, prison reform and all of that, because all of those stories are actually eventually going to be told in our museum. So the people who fund that sort of thing would be probably interested in doing that as well. So now I'm on the right slide. Once you find them, how do you get them to give? And the first step is research, because you do need to know something about them and their interests, their gifts, and their giving capacity. So really quickly, look at where they've given before, and that kind of shows what projects they're interested in. Have they given? Are they endowing things? Are they giving annual appeals? Do they like their name on stuff? What's their average gift size? That gives you an idea of their capacity. Are they involved? Are they sitting on boards? Are they sitting on visiting committees and that sort of thing? And, talk to them who knows them, your board, your staff. They might be able to give you further insight into those donors. And then talk to the prospect too. Find out what their philanthropic priorities are. And then you move on to cultivation once you sort of have your donor list and you know what about them. And you use what you've learned about them to build the donor-centered relationship that's built on their philanthropic interests. So and these are the strategies you're all familiar with. There are the events, there's the tours, the one-on-one meetings, all of the things that your development department frequently asks you to help with to do. That's all part of the cultivation to get people in and get them engaged. Now, and hopefully I can get the slide to turn. There it is. Oh, yeah. Now, in the time of COVID, I also wanted to do something really brief about donor fatigue. And this is what occurs when a donor is inundated with endless donation requests. So what happens is because they're getting hit with you so much and really getting nothing in return, they lose track of the urgency, and it kind of results in like a Novocaine effect where they become numb to all the asks. And, they're not desensitized to giving, they're just desensitized to giving to you. Because often a fatigued donor is actually giving to other charities. And signs of this are declining donations, seeing an increase in lapsed donors, decreased appeal proceeds. These are all indications of it. So how do you prevent it? And you need to do consistent communication and constant communication, but you need to do it more strategically than you normally would. So it's about, keeping them updated, letting them know they're valued, and also what reciprocal support you can provide in these trying times. So, report results, emphasizing your activities, the need for the services, all rather than the need for the funding, and letting them know you're there for them, and that you're not focusing on the situation like a COVID situation. And that was, one of the things one of my clients did in orchestra. They were one of the earliest ones to do online streaming of music performances, because they were like, we love you. We love our audiences. We're missing seeing you. We want to be able to give you the gift of music, even though we can't all be together right now. And then the other thing too is, tell a different story. And I talk a lot about stories. The pandemic's effects aren't going to go away anytime soon. And in time, it's not going to be at the forefront of the donor's mind. So you need to kind of counter this by talking more about your activities, transition to virtual content, your safety measures, your expanded reach, your community engagement, things that will show that you're solving problems but aren't necessarily about the actual crisis. And as an example for this, I talk about my beloved Barnum Museum, which was hit by a tornado. And for early on, it was responsive fundraising, getting money in there to shore the building so it didn't collapse, because there was a lot of structural damage, of doing triage for the collection to make sure it was safe and secure. But then about 6 months out, you kind of realize that no one really cared about the tornado anymore, and no one wanted to hear about the tornado anymore. So it was, how do we change the story so that we're still getting the support, but we're not telling that same story over and over again. So we really shifted it instead to a re-envisioning of the museum. and, you know, that we were going to look at the way the exhibitions were done, look at the technology, look at everything, so that we were a better, new, improved Barnum Museum for the community. And that, at the end of the day, was really what the community wanted to hear, because they wanted to know what the museum was going to do for them if they were going to support it. So we were able to present that. Now, moving on to corporations, you know, why do they give? It's image. It's about creating that positive image in the community. And it also improves performance. There's a direct correlation between corporate support in the community and the bottom line, the corporate performance, because contributions to other organizations, that's name recognition. You know, people see that they're doing something good in the community. And also, too, an improved community attracts better employees. So if there are good services within the community, they're going to get a better level of employee, which means that their business will do better. How do they give? You know, there's the obvious, the outright matching gifts, but also think beyond cash. You know, there's the pro bono equipment or services, facilities use, in-kind gifts, sponsorship, all of that. So you could be much more creative with a corporation in terms of what they can do for you. And I always say, don't forget the little guy. Because, you know, most of my clients will come to me initially and be like, well, we want to go to Goldman, we want to go here, we want to go there. And I always say to them, that's all fine and dandy, but the reality is you'll probably get bupkis. So let's look at the little guy, because 3/4 of corporate arts funding comes from smaller businesses. They see it as a good investment in their community, and they have much more to gain from the publicity around their gifts. So they're actually easier to talk to and more willing. Now, treating a request as a negotiation. You know, in the past, corporations and museums, the focus was, and we would interface about the name on the wall. You know, the exhibition, you walk in and you would see, you know, usually it was Phillips or Altria or what of that. But when the market tanked in 07 or 08 or 09, depending on what year you're looking at, that really all changed. And the fact of the matter is we don't know what the other wants anymore. So this is up to you. And this is where you can come in terms of taking a leadership role in the negotiation. Because that's what it is. It's you have to treat it as a business negotiation. It's not like a request to a donor or a request to a foundation. You know, figure out what their goals are, express what yours are, and then find those areas of alignment and build from there. You know, how can your mission, how can your project, how can, you know, help them help theirs? And also, too, can helping you help them reach their target audiences? I work with a historic house, and we had done paint analysis and figured out the original paint colors. So we were going to repaint the interiors of the house. So we went to Benjamin Moore and said, look, we're doing this, and, you know, would you be willing to donate the paint? Again, we weren't looking for money, we were looking for paint. And so you have a historic house where a lot of the people that are coming through are interested in, you know, renovating houses, preservation, all of that. And you have signs everywhere saying that the paint was supplied by Benjamin Moore. So people will make that correlation in their head. So you're able to target that way. Foundations, I'm not going to go too very much into, because they are in some ways very, very straightforward. In regard to finding them, there's, you know, the foundation directory online, which is now part of Candid. There is, you know, foundation websites, which there are more and more of, particularly for smaller family foundations. I'm seeing more and more of them now. But if you can't, and there isn't a website, or, you know, the foundation directory's record isn't that informative, you can go to the Form 990, the IRS tax filing, and get a good idea of what they're funding and what kind of projects they're funding and how much and what their capacity is. And, you know, in terms of going to them, you know, they're very clear about what they want. You know, follow those guidelines. They're there for a reason. And just as you would cultivate a donor, cultivate your program officers, develop those relationships, even with the government ones, your NEH, your IMLS, all of that. Get to know them, and let them know what you're doing. Allow them to help you with your proposals and that sort of thing. And just a few kind of words of warnings, some of which I know some in the audience will know this is very obvious, but, you know, don't create a project to fit the guidelines. because they will want you to continue that project once the money runs out. And if it's not something you normally do, you're stuck. What are you going to do? You're going to have to, pull money out of reserves or what have you to keep the project going or the program going, what have you. Don't, on the reverse of that is don't go to a foundation where your project doesn't fit. No matter how much your board member says, I know so-and-so at this foundation and all of that, if your project isn't going to help them fulfill their mission, they're not going to be interested. So don't waste your time. Focus on cultivating the foundations that are going to fund what you need the funding for. And, as I said, time is best spent doing the research. And, I should backtrack too by saying that 85% of my job is research, because it's not about the asking, it's not about the grant proposals. It's really figuring out who's going to be interested in what I need or clients needs funding and finding them. And that's what you do a lot of. Now I'm going to go, yes, this is the Lake District. I always pop up pretty pictures when I don't have a slide to illustrate what it is I'm talking about. So now that you understand where the money comes from, and assuming raising money isn't your primary role, here are a few suggestions to help you play an integral part in fundraising for your institution. And I'm just assuming it's all institutions, business, clients, however you wanted to do it. And yes, regardless of your role, you should play an integral part in fundraising. In all the years I've been presenting on fundraising for museums, the one resounding comment I have often heard from colleagues is that, while this information is really good to know, fundraising really isn't relevant to my role as a conservator, curator, archivist, registrar, whatever. It's just not in my job description. And I'm going to disagree, and I know there are many out there as well that are going to say the same as well. But you have to remember, you're much bigger than your individual role. You are a contributor to the well-being of your organization and, as coming conservator, the preservation of your collection or whatever you're doing with your collection, curating, what have you. If you have that ultra-focused mindset, this is all I do, you're cutting yourself off from the influence and the resources that will make your job easier. The development department is not the sole owner of fundraising at your institution. This is a team sport with colleagues and board members and the development department and everybody's playing their parts. So, and yours is to make the donors understand that saving stuff or collection objects or interpreting disperses or, whatever it is you do, are all great things. And it's not just for those who go to the museums, but for the community as a whole. And that's why the donor should invest in it. So some of you will say this isn't the culture of the institution, that your department or whatever has a very specific role and that the board, the director, et cetera, won't let you have the voice. And I have heard this over the years. My response to my colleagues, friends who had said this to me is, speak louder. No one is going to create a culture where you are valued but you. So, and I can hear it now, I'm way too busy. And my response to that is figure out how to incorporate ways in demonstrating your value or expressing your value in your existing daily workload. Don't add on more. So in other words, if you're doing exhibition planning, use it as a way of advocating for your work, your department, whatever, or use it to take on a leadership role. Use a lab or a storage tour as a way to communicate to donors the value of your department. Don't assume they'll figure it out or let them walk away with just that cool experience. Use gallery talks as a way to engage audiences. Show them their donations at work. And use a school group tour or participate in a school STEM program as a way to engage communities. That your value also comes in what you give as opposed to what you get. The one walk away I want you to have from this is money follows value. If you create an environment where your work is of genuine value to the audience, the community, your board, your colleagues, the dollars, in theory, will come. And it does happen. So how can you start with this? And start by creating a culture of philanthropy. And this is not about securing grants and donations. Creating a culture of philanthropy is about nurturing giving within your institution. And I'm going to come at this as a conservative because it's just easier for me. You can create this culture by promoting your area as an important, your area as an important contributor to the values and overall mission of the organization. All parties, whether they be the chief conservator, curator, associate, or the intern, should be able to articulate a case for giving that both highlights your importance, places your worth within the context of all the important work the organization does, and describes its impact beyond the institution's walls. Everybody should promote philanthropy, whether you're speaking to a major donor or an audience on a gallery tour. That doesn't mean, again, not asking for donations. This is about saying thank you in a way that makes that $250 gallery tour donor or person on the gallery tour feel just as acknowledged as the $1 million donor whose name is on the wall. It means you're showing the good that the donations have done in terms of preserving our cultural heritage or whatever it is you do. On the flip side of that, integrate the donor's motivation. What is their value? In my discussions with donors, I have learned from them that their support is stemmed from believing in the organization and sharing its values, as I said before. But more importantly, they want to deepen their understanding of things within their own collections. This is why your relationship with development and the information they can provide is so crucial. You got a donor coming in for a tour, you're having a lunch meeting, whatever. Ask for donor briefs. Know what they give and know what their interests. With that information, you can tailor that interaction to the interests and create a deeper connection. It's that combined with the great experience, because there's no better way to engage a donor than bringing them up on a scaffold or letting them see the reverse of a tapestry or they're being this close to a Leonardo. That, all of that's going to give that your collection or whatever value in their eyes. Now, how do you create, going beyond that? How do you convey that value? And I always say, when you're speaking with them, use prose, not processes. And again, I'm coming at this slightly from a conservation angle because it's what I know, but you can substitute curatorial, registrar, archivists, whatever sort of what your area is within this. When we're asked about an item we're conserving, we tend to get technical. Conservators do this. And we'll talk about paint analysis. We'll talk about fiber structure. We'll talk about the chemistry of materials. And sometimes the donor understands. Sometimes their eyes glaze over. So to appeal to donors instead, I say use a narrative and a story. People respond more positively to a good story. And it helps them comprehend what you're doing, especially if there's no previous knowledge. So I kind of suggest using the artifacts travel through time. And, and by doing that, you're making the object come alive. You're giving historical meaning to the cracks, the losses, the tears, whatever, the edits, if you're dealing with documents. But more importantly, you're making it relatable. And the process, and the process behind preserving that artifact or whatever, valuable. So, for example, in talking about textiles, I would describe how they were used and how that use caused the damage. With tapestries, because that was my specialty, I would talk about repair traditions of the past, how that changed when tapestries were no longer fashionable, and the impact of those repairs on treatments now. And if more detail was needed, I'm telling stories about the dyers and how they would fudge dye recipes and that would cause damage. And that, so it wasn't the chemistry, it was the people behind the damage and their stories. And what did that do? It helped elicit an emotional response. It made what was going on, that damage, and how it got there much more compelling. And it encourages donors too to explore their own connections. So always think of a lab tour, whatever interaction with a donor as an exchange. It's not a lecture. So allow them to, tell their stories and explore their own personal connection with whatever it is you're discussing. And don't forget the power of individual objects. The fundraising literature, and particularly right now, that will tell you to use a project-based approach, that because no one funds general operating support, or general operating funds are very, very limited. So you want to give your donors something concrete to fund, something they could take ownership of. The problem with that is addressing the needs of 30,000 objects, let's say, is too much for a donor process. They're going to wonder how their donation is really going to make a difference, and they'll assume it won't, so they won't give. So make one object the spokesperson of whatever the project is, or campaign, or what have you. It'll show more easily how the donor can be part of the solution. They're not saving 1 million books. They're saving that Jane Austen first edition, that Holbein drawing, that colonial sampler. And in doing this too, you're making them part of your collection care story. Their donation, they're part of the saving of the Jane Austen book, Anne Boleyn's portrait, anything like that. And then that in turn makes them feel that they're involved in something much bigger than themselves. And again, with all of this, it becomes personal. They're involved in it. And that's what gives your work value to them, and then gives them also, too, a better understanding of the need to fund it. Now, your colleagues, be an ambassador. And that's what I always say, by leading, teaching, and collaborating. Be a leader. Determine what you can contribute to organizational growth. And that might be, organizing tasks, facilitating a group, or figuring out how you can use your talents and skills to lead initiatives that give value within the organizational framework. Lead it into the future. Don't be scared about taking on that sort of roles. And I know particularly in conservation, there's been a lot of this coming out in recent years. Teaching. It should be an organic part of your daily routine, not reserved for the lecture hall or classroom. You want to use occasions when they arise to impart knowledge, explaining it, demonstrating it, encouraging interest in it. And don't forget collaboration. It gives you the opportunities to be at the even bigger tables, such as those of the community, in government, and in affinity organizations. Use collaboration to strengthen your existing relationships and build new ones, because like with fundraising, good collaboration is relationship centric. And because you're able to expand your organizational horizons through all of this, you're giving value to yourself. Your audience. And I'm going to read this. In giving community a meaningful voice, Dr. Candace Tangora Maitlik and her fellow authors state, to become relevant in our communities, the traditional activities of collecting, preserving, researching, and exhibiting are no longer adequate. Our organizations are now challenged to justify our existence and support in terms of our public service value, or the positive contribution we make to our communities. Public service value? Yeah, what does this mean? It's about engagement with your audience, with your community. And I often rely on Doug Borwick's blog, Engaging Matters, when I have to look at engaging issues. And there's two. Audience engagement is a marketing strategy that designed for deepening relationships with current stakeholders and expanding reach over time. This is internally focused. It's also known as audience development. Community engagement is designed to create and maintain relationships with individuals and communities, many of whom are not currently affiliated with the organization. It's selfless. You get nothing out of it. If you're looking for a return on investment, that's audience engagement. Community engagement is working with key stakeholders in the community to determine how you can play a role in meeting the needs. So why do it? Because it articulates your value to the community. Again, going back to the Barnum Museum, you're not just about doing good work in the museum, you're doing good work outside of it as well. It makes you an integral part of the community, one that is a valuable contributor and can help solve its problems. And that obviously gives you a lot of value. And just so you know, another pretty picture, this is the garden at the Merchant's House Museum, one of my clients. So in conclusion, the changing museum framework that we're experiencing means that professionals are being forced to rethink their roles, which have expanded or become outward facing. We also have new departments, like those focusing on inclusion and equity, which are taking a portion of already limited resources. To convey value, we need to make ourselves relevant to ourselves, meaning us, individuals, relevant to the mission, not the other way around, meaning that our traditional roles are no longer our sole raison d'etre. This influences our justification for funding as well. While I don't dispute that individual objects are significant, these days that argument isn't always the best to justify funding. How will the object be used to educate, engage, enlighten? Why is it and its care integral to the public service of the institution? In other words, what is the impact and how do we evaluate them to ensure we are creating value? Outside the institution, we often deal with economic impact as the justification for arts funding in the eyes of many. And you can read a lot about the visitor economy, where I can run off the statistics. 68% of tourism in the U.S. is culture driven. Every cultural dollar spent results in $51 going to the local economy, on and on and on. But the reality to this too, while it's important and there are many grant opportunities and funding opportunities that are based on economic impact, I'm not downplaying it, but we don't want that impact to be solely fiscal. It is also, we are also a leading contributor in terms of what makes a good society. And to quote Diane Ragsdale, whose Jumper blog is one of my favorites, beware of economic impact arguments. The more we use them, the more we commodify what we do. The more we use them, the harder it becomes to make the case to policymakers that our value is not indirectly spurring economic growth, but in building the social cohesion and trust that underpin a social society. So what is that social impact? There's a great deal of data out there from Americans for the Arts and their Social Impact Explorer. But a lot of that can be translated through your work to demonstrate your impact, such as schools calling on museums and other arts organizations to complement school curricula. And we've been seeing that a lot now with the COVID and the close downs. Schools are turning to online museum programs to help them. Engaging in cultural activities improves academic success. It facilitates our understanding of controversial history, also very key in current times, and it galvanizes interest in the community's future. So as you begin to become involved in fundraising, as you learn to communicate your value, you need to look less at what you've done to accomplish your goals and more at what has changed as a result of your work. It's the external results that matter, what the difference did, and how it will improve the lives of your audience. And with that, I say thank you for listening, and I'm willing to take questions.
Thank you so much, Susan. That was a wonderful and thorough presentation. I was taking notes. I'm sure many of us were. We have a question from Mary Jane Taylor. Mary Jane, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself so that you can ask your question. Or if you'd prefer, I can also ask it.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Corporate foundations that I've seen require a level of employee volunteerism as part of their donation. And what advice do you have to cultural organizations to help maximize that value, not just to fulfill the requirement, but also to really help the organization succeed?
Well, it really depends in terms of, and not knowing where you're coming from, what it is the organization needs. And it could be everything from doing, garden work around a historic house to painting. There's a variety of things that I know. One historic house in Upper Manhattan, they have one of their corporate sponsors. They have a garden event every year where the employees come in and weed and plant new flowers and all that sort of stuff. So, depending on what your organization needs and what can be done safely by an untrained staff, I think that's kind of what you can figure out. And I think it is sort of looking at those sort of easier things. And who, in terms of who manages them, in the case of a garden, it's the garden team, the horticulture team, or something like that. If you did wanted to bring people in to, rehouse a collection or something like that, obviously it's going to be your curatorial and or conservation staff is going to be the ones managing it. I'm trying to think of the volunteer events at some of the organizations that I work with. We also have, organizations, particularly some of the ones I work with in the UK, that use corporate volunteers for things like docent tours and that kind of thing. So again, it goes back to things that are safe. The Historic House Trust of New York City, I forget who funds it. I want to say it's Con Ed. They have what they refer to as their roof raisers program, where people, employees from corporations are given a day of training on how to do, less threatening tasks like dusting and that sort of thing. And then they're able to go into whatever particular historic house and do things like that. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If anyone else has any other questions that they'd like to quickly throw into the chat, we've got about 5 more minutes. But while I wait to see if anyone does, I thought I would ask a question. Mm-hmm. Co-host prerogative. I'm on staff at a museum here in Miami, and we are, Miami is a very large city with a relatively tight-knit, small arts community, significant on a national scale, but small. And I guess I was wondering if you had any thoughts about how to negotiate the fundraising landscape when there are just a very specific group of donors and institutions that overlap quite a bit in terms of mission and scope, wanting to be collegial and respect each other's donor base and be thoughtful about that, but also wanting to be creative as fundraisers.
Exactly. I mean, and this is, again, it's something I come across a lot with my UK clients, because there's a much more collaborative mentality here than there is there. Organizations over there are very protective of their donors. And I always say, no. Over here, we all talk to each other. As I said before, all the Anglo-American groups, we all talk to each other. We all work together and all of that. And yes, to some degree, we all kind of have the same donors. So I think I would, go back to your donors and see what they would be interested in terms of possibly collaborating with others. But also looking at them at different times. So, oftentimes I will hear from, a donor, well, I have to fulfill this one now, but I'll come back to you in 3 months. So get yourself on the donor's radar, and then, everybody kind of waiting in line, basically, to get what it is they're needed. I mean, if it's a small donor pool within the community, everybody's going to the same people. I have this with, Small Historical Society out in Queens, but it's being creative in terms of how we ask, and it's being creative in terms of what we're asking for. So, we just got a challenge grant. One of the COVID relief grants was a challenge grant. Small, $1,000. We have to raise 2. So great, we're able to go out to everybody for that. If we're doing a kids program, we have a neighborhood architecture day. We just go to the families, with people with kids for that. If we're doing our annual meeting, that's going to attract an older audience. We go to them for that. So I think yes, you're all going to the same donors, but I think you need to also target it for their specific interests and their specific needs, more importantly.
Great, thank you. I think that might bring us to the end. So I just wanted to thank you so much, Susan, for presenting and for sharing all of your knowledge with us. And we're so grateful to have had you and to have partnered with the conservation program for this project, and to kind of seen how your career transformed and now how you're helping institutions move forward. I will also, in the last minute, urge everyone, as Lara said at the beginning, to check out our future events and our upcoming events, as well as continue to support the society so that we can continue to do this kind of programming. And thank you all so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.